We're going to go to the next portion of our program, which is going to be dealing with issues on the Federal Reserve and the mortgage crisis. To give us some more insight onto this topic, I'd like to invite up Ani and Eileen.
First of all, is it true that the Federal Reserve Board is the bank of the government? The government does all of its banking through the Federal Reserve.
Well, let me start by saying what the Federal Reserve is and how it came into being and why we have a Federal Reserve Board. I think that's the most important thing to understand. And let me start also by saying I'm not an expert, because the nature of the secrecy of the Fed is such that I don't think such a person can exist. It's very, very difficult to get information about what the Federal Reserve is and what it does. Coming from the brokerage business, I did a lot of research on this. I was interested in it. What happened was sometime in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a series of about 6 or 7 very quick economic booms and busts that upset the status quo of the nation. People were very concerned about the financial system. At that point, money was run by the government. The government produced its own money and distributed it accordingly. A group of bankers, essentially J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and a couple of other individuals, got together and recognized that there was a fundamental flaw in the monetary system of this nation, and that if they could take control of the monetary system, they could exploit that fundamental flaw for profit. So by stepping up and approaching the government and saying, we want to manage the system so that you don't have the booms and busts anymore, we think we can do a good job, the government assigned that capacity to those bankers, and the Federal Reserve System was born. What is the Federal Reserve? How does it function? What does it do? Its purpose is to create money and redistribute money. It creates money in 2 ways. It creates cash money through producing it through the Treasury, simply by saying to the Treasury, make X amount of dollars or coins, and that amount is minted and created and distributed from the Fed. It also creates money through the private banking system, because the Fed is basically owned by private banks, which was the way it was initially set up. We're told that it's an arm or institution of the federal government. It's a hybrid, but for the most part, the owners of the Federal Reserve are the private banks. The way that it redistributes money is through the issuing of federal bonds, treasury bonds. A bond is an IOU, where the Federal Reserve can create a bond, sell it to the general public, and use that to draw money, cash money, back in from the system to wherever it's been distributed to. Right now, we spend $60–70 billion a month overseas on goods and services, which means a lot of our cash goes overseas. So if we want to bring cash back to this country and redistribute it, we create these bonds. They get sold overseas, the money comes back, and then it's in the Federal Reserve Bank again, and they can redistribute it through the member banks. Of course, that's all attached with interest, so we, the people, pay interest to borrow our own money back from the people where we've spent it overseas and in other places. The way that money gets created, other than the simple manufacture of dollars and cents, is through what's called a 10% reserve requirement rule. That enables the Federal Reserve to lend money to the various member banks. Right now, the current interest rate is like 0.25%. And wouldn't you love to be able to borrow money at 0.25%? Guess what? It's our money. It's being lent to the banks at 0.25%. And the way the rule works is, let's take a simple number like $1 million. The Federal Reserve gives that bank $1 million at 0.25% interest. The bank is allowed to put that money in the vault and then lend out $9 million against that $1 million that they put in the vault. Well, where does the $9 million come from? Because it doesn't exist. It gets created by the bank in the form of digital credits every time they create a mortgage and they write a loan to an individual. They're making up the money out of thin air, backing it by that $1 million they have in the vault. So they make up $9 million backed by the $1 million in the vault. Now that $9 million they lend out has interest attached to it. So they're charging you money to borrow money that's made up out of thin air and backed by absolutely nothing except 10 cents on the dollar. So we're paying this enormous rate of interest, in some cases 25, 30% on credit cards, to borrow invented money from banks who get to decide where the money goes. And that's the way the system works, in a nutshell.
It's not working very well.
No.
At least not for us. I mean, I crafted this one question. I don't know how difficult this might be, but if money became a simple medium of exchange, rather than debt-based, interest-bearing symbol of true wealth, would the Fed still need to exist?
Well, let me go back to the point that I made in the very beginning. Some of you may have remembered me saying that the original bankers were exploiting a fundamental flaw in the banking system.
Right.
What was the flaw? Well, if you know anything about how supply and demand and feedback loops work, you know that there has to be, in order for balance to be achieved, there has to be approximately the same amount of supply as there is of demand for something. And when you're marrying two separate things in a feedback loop, they have to be in balance in order for the feedback loop to be sustainable. What we did with our banking system is we took something that was in virtually infinite supply. We took human labor, human intelligence, and the creative capacity of humanity on one side, abundant, virtually inexhaustible, infinite supply, and we matched it to something we called money, which is kept deliberately scarce, because that's the only way it can retain value. Well, if you know anything about supply and demand, when you match something that's in abundant supply with something that's kept deliberately scarce, there's an imbalance that's created immediately. The power all goes to the monetary side, because if you can control and restrict the flow of money, all this energy over here that's trying to feed into the system and generate creation and generate productivity and goods and services and exchange, it all gets bottlenecked because it's competing for that little bit of money that's available. And what the bankers realized is whoever controlled the money controlled all the resources and all the productivity of humanity, and pit individuals against each other, trying to activate their ability to get the little bit of money that was being dispersed through the system. And that's the system that we adopted. I don't think we understood it. I don't think any of us really had any concept whatsoever, because we were all born into it. It was already here.
So you're saying that the basic flaw in our current economic system is money?
I'm saying it's the scarcity of money.
Yeah.
Yes, you cannot match abundance with scarcity and create abundance. It just won't work. It bottlenecks all the abundance.
So you're saying that money is keeping us from giving our gifts and getting what we need and...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we have so much work to do. And all of us have so many gifts to give. We all have energy. How many people are unemployed? And yet, if we look around, there's a ton of things that this nation needs to get done. Why isn't it getting done? Because there's no money to pay for it. Why is there no money to pay for it? Because there's no way to earn a profit off of cleaning up straws on the beach. Nobody benefits from that other than humanity. No business corporation can benefit and turn a profit unless they can find a way to convert those straws into a consumable product that they can sell back to you at more money than it costs you to pick them up. That's what we're living in. It's absurd. It's an absurd system on its face, and we've all bought into it without challenging the beliefs or the paradigm at all.
So the financial services industry, which has as its center the Federal Reserve Board with the member banks, control all of the money.
Yes.
And because we have agreed with that some kind of way, we have bought into that, we operate in that, we give consent to that, but we're beginning to draw back from that consent and find out more about it. But if, in fact, we stopped participating in the debt-based, interest-driven system of money, what could you envision differently? Do we need money to live as a global society?
For me, that remains an open question. I continue to remain open to anybody that can show me a monetary system that is abundant, that matches abundance with abundance, and then I'll buy into it. But so far, every system I've seen that has been developed has been a scarcity-based system. And that seems to me to be problematic. I cannot see how we can make scarcity and the abundance of human creative capacity match itself. Now, the one thing I do notice is that as I looked at why money came into being in the first place, my sense of it is that money was a substitute for trust. When we had an enormous population that was expanding rapidly and lots of different products that needed to be traded and simple barter didn't work anymore, we needed a way to say, okay, Joe from city three cities away is making cabinets and I'm growing corn and somehow my corn has to filter over there, but how do I know that Joe did the work that Joe says he did if he comes over here to get my corn? And I don't want his cabinets anyway, somebody else wanted his cabinets. Well, what happened was by creating this monetary chit to represent the labor and the productivity that we put into the system, it was a guarantee. Oh, so-and-so did some work somewhere in the system. Humanity has benefited from what that person did. I'll take the chit, give them my real resources, and then I'll spend the chit somewhere else and someone will believe that I did work. So it was a substitute for trust with people that we did not know. Well, as the system got more complex and we created these central banking systems, we began to put our trust in the central banking system. So now we trust each other less and less, and we trust the central banking system more and more. How's that working out for you? So my sense of it is, if we have to put our trust somewhere, it's probably time for us to drop the whole need to immediately measure what everybody else is doing and just begin to trust each other once again. And use the resources that we have at our disposal, use the consciousness that's moving through humanity today, where the recognition that we are all one living organism on one planet, embedded in a unified field, and that whatever we do to elevate one of us elevates us all, and whatever we do to diminish one of us diminishes us all. And as that belief begins to embody itself in humanity, it becomes easier for us to trust and say, I don't need to give you something and get something directly in return right now. Prove to me that you've done something. I just want to give to you because I want you to be the best you can be and bring forth the most magnificent thing you can bring forth and give it away to everybody else, because that's how abundance works. That's how nature works. That's the blueprint we have. And I would invite us to reconsider moving away from the natural blueprint, because it has worked for nature for many, many millions of years, and we're pretty young. And I think we were arrogant to think that we could stray from that blueprint and do something better and different. Coming back to it with higher consciousness is a good idea.